Very soon after the launch of Operation Rahe-Rast in Swat, came the announcement that a separate operation, Rahe-Nijat, had been launched against Baitullah Mahsood in Waziristan. Thus far, the operation's been limited to airstrikes, and those who expected to see columns of tanks and ground troops roll into Waziristan have been disappointed. So why is there this seeming reticence to actually going in on the ground in Waziristan? Well, before we take a look forward, let's take a look back.
A dangerous militant is on the loose in Waziristan, raising armies among the tribes and raising the banner of a rebellion cloaked in calls for jihad against the infidel. Armies sent to track him down are lost and ambushed in the hills and alleys of Waziristan. The man himself is like a shadow. His spies are everywhere, always surrounded by loyal bodyguards and always on the move, using the rough terrain to his advantage with its caves, gorges and mountains as hiding places and escape routes. But the year is not 2009 and the man in question is not Baitullah Mahsood. The year is 1937 and the man is Mirza Ali Khan, better known as the Fakir of Ippi. At one point, nearly 40,000 British and Indian troops were reported to be in the field trying to capture him, while the Fakir had at the time a force of about 1,000 men. He succeeded in not only evading the tight net surrounding him, but laying siege to Miran Shah and Mir Ali, names that resonate even today in a war not so different to the one fought so many years ago. Even when Pakistan was created, the rebellion did not end, and it was only the surrender of his commander-in-chief Meher Dil and the withdrawal of tribal support that finally ended his revolt. The Fakir himself died during the night in the year 1960 of natural causes. Frank Leeson, the last surviving British soldier to have served in Waziristan, has this to say about the terrain. When one speaks of them as hills, rolling down on which tanks and cavalry can operate are not meant, but the worst mountain warfare country imaginable. Steep precipices, narrow winding valleys, every vantage point commanded by another, and innumerable refugee and routes of escape.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. Those words could have been written for Waziristan and the tribes that inhabit that rugged terrain, and of course for those unfortunate regimes who have to deal with them.
Western commentators, frustrated over lack of progress in Afghanistan, blame the presence of militant resources in Waziristan and want them taken out. At home in Pakistan, there are many who, quite understandably, say that without cutting off the head of the snake, Baitullah Mahsood, there can be no end to the scourge of terror that has so afflicted us.
But increasingly, there are also voices calling for caution. And they aren't just those people who still have some lingering misplaced sympathies for Baitullah Mahsood and the rest of his terrorist cronies.
And they point to the fact that, well, operations in Waziristan have been tried before, with little success. The latest such offensive was in 2007, and just like all the others, it stalled and was followed by truces and peace deals that further boosted the myth of the Taliban's invincibility. These successes gave the Pakistani Taliban the confidence to spread out, and extremists and obscurantists across Pakistan rallied to their cause.
But the single refrain we have heard from the international community, both diplomatic and journalistic, for the last 8 or so years has been do more. So, while domestic reticence is perhaps understandable, one expects that foreign governments and analysts would be falling over themselves demanding that Pakistan immediately commit ground troops to Waziristan. But surprisingly, that's not the case.
And one man in particular has been outspoken about why the Pakistan army should not go into Waziristan. Scholar and writer Nicholas Schmidl. And Schmidl's not an armchair analyst. He's lived for 2 years in Pakistan, has travelled extensively across the country, and also has the distinction of being kicked out of Pakistan during the Musharraf years for publishing an article called Next Gen Taliban. Schmidl believes, and has laid out in his article, that the time is not right for a Waziristan operation.
And we've got Mr. Schmidl on the line with us to ask the question, why?
I think that it is. I think that it cannot be overemphasized how important it is for the Pakistani army to get SWAT right. In other words, for the Pakistani army to eliminate the top leadership of the Taliban and SWAT, and for the Pakistani army to rehabilitate and get all of these internally displaced people back to their homes, and to have convinced them that perhaps they were lackadaisical the first time around in allowing the Taliban to come into SWAT, but that it won't happen again. And so, in other words, I see SWAT as being a golden opportunity for the Pakistani intelligence and military establishment to show all Pashtuns on either side of the border that something has changed in the past few months, and that this isn't just another one of those operations that sort of go in for a short period of time, but then aren't able to consolidate and hold on to their gains. And in some ways, I actually see if the army leaves SWAT, leaves all of these people displaced, and does potentially allow the militants to come in, I kind of almost see a parallel between the way the Bush administration turned on Afghanistan to focus on Iraq in 2003 to what could happen if the Pakistani army turns away from SWAT to focus on South Waziristan in 2009.
Okay, but there's also no doubt that without getting rid of Baitullah Masood, there will probably be no end to the wave of terrorism that has almost engulfed Pakistan. So how do you do that without actually going into Waziristan?
Well, they are going into South Waziristan in some form, because obviously the U.S. and the Pakistani intelligence and military establishment right now is cooperating very, very, very closely on these drone strikes. What I find very interesting about the recent rash of drone strikes is that in the past, after each one of these strikes, the Taliban released very quickly a report saying that no, it didn't kill any fighters, it only killed women and children. And it would suggest to me that the intelligence that's being shared by both countries is getting significantly better, because now we don't even see the Taliban offering a counter narrative to what the reports coming out of these areas are, which is that they're killing all militants. And so I think that this is very important. I think that the space that Baitullah is able to operate in is constricting. And in fact, the chances of getting Baitullah in a ground operation, in a sort of a land invasion involving columns of Pakistani troops, is very slim. Whereas the chance of killing Baitullah in an airstrike when he's unsuspecting is, I think, much greater.
So then, in essence, aren't we looking at what historically has been called the divide and rule policy, and what in more modern terms we may call the good militant, bad militant game? Doesn't history in fact show that playing on tribal allegiances is really the only way to deal with a place like Waziristan?
Well, this has obviously already been tried several times. I mean, we saw this incident with Qari Zainuddin, who spoke out and said that he set up this anti-Baitullah group and that he had 3,000 fighters behind him. And yet within 10 days of that interview and within 10 days of his sort of coming out party, he'd been assassinated in Dar es Makan. So I think this shows that, if this guy, Qari Zainuddin, was, as he said, an asset and was planning to work with the Pakistani military as they rolled into South Waziristan, it also shows that Pakistani military needs to be able to protect these assets. If it's going to convince fighters and tribes to turn against Baitullah, and it can't protect those very people, and Baitullah kills them before they're able to do any sort of significant action, then what good is all the process and the effort of turning the tribes? I mean, I do agree that local dynamics are the key here, much more than soldiers and much more than airstrikes and whatnot. But, if those local dynamics aren't able to actually go into effect, then they're ultimately insignificant.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Schmidl.
Thanks a bunch.
And there you have it. Ultimately, it comes down to what your mother always taught you, which is chew what's already in your mouth before taking another, possibly very prickly bite. But regardless of how the whole Baitullah Masood situation pans out, there is something going on in Waziristan that is extremely significant for the future, and not just Pakistan's future. I'm talking about the development, testing and refinement of unmanned aerial vehicle technology. Yes, I'm talking drones. And if you think that this predator right here is bad news, well, you have no idea what's coming next to a sky near you. Stick around and find out.